Hi, so in this video, we're going to work on if statements, which is an AP CSA Unit 2 topic. Okay, so let's get into it. So one of the things that's important in if statements, and we'll get into this more in a second, is being able to test for equality and inequality in Java. So this is where we had talked about this in an earlier unit, the equals operator. And so, with if statements, we're going to be trying to make decisions in our code. And so in order to do that, we want to make comparisons about values. And one of the ones that is important is being able to compare if two values are the same. So 2 equals true evaluates to true because they're the same value. 4 plus 5 equals 9 is true because, 4 plus 5 is 9 and then 9 equals 9. Okay. And then this is something that you're going to get tested on a few times, and there will be a multiple choice question on the AP exam about this. And it's about equality for strings. We did go over this in a previous unit, but regardless, we'll repeat it here. Even though these two strings, Charlie and Charlie, are the same, the equals sign does not apply here. For strings, you need to use the dot equals method. So that's just something to remember and look out for. So there's also the not equals operator, and not equals is for doing the opposite. So 2 is not equal to 2. So 2 not equals 2 evaluates to false. Okay, so here's a quick slide with all of the different relational operators that we have. All the different relational operators are kind of what you would expect, and you learn these in math class in middle school at some point. So there's less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, equals, and not equals. Those are the main ones that you really care about. So one of the things that will come up a lot of times, and there's a curious little bit in my slides here as to whether I misused less than or equal to, but be careful, right? Like, if you're just like in math class, right? Less than or equal to are different. 7 is less than 8. 7 is less than or equal to 8. 8 is not less than 8. But 8 is less than or equal to 8. So something to consider. Okay, so here's the actual bulk of it. Here's what we're interested in. So if statements. So if statements are about either doing one word for if statements is conditional, and conditional means you're going to do something depending on some condition. So in my little slides here, right, I say if some condition. So you put in the parentheses right after the if, the condition. Then you have these curly braces, and the curly braces is all the code inside of there is what will happen in the event that the if statement is true. So a lot of examples on the AP exam or that you'll be doing in class involve if statements, and they involve making these comparisons. And so something important to be able to kind of evaluate what the code is going to do ahead of time. And one thing that's really good about if statements is that they're pretty logical. So we will flip back and forth to the code editor to make sure that we really fully understand everything, but they're actually pretty logical. So let's just read this as people who don't know a lot about Java, but can read and write English. So if a person's age is 27, if the person's age is greater than 24, they can legally rent a car. Okay, so what happens when we evaluate this condition is that we look for person's age. Person's age is equal to 27. 27 is greater than 24, so we do the print statement. We do this stuff inside the curly braces, okay? So, let's just do this. But it's not like rocket. I mean, I don't want to be like, oh, it's not rocket science, whatever. But it's kind of a fairly simple thing here to be able to guess what's going to happen here. Now, if we change their age to 12, then nothing's going to get printed out. Okay, so that's the bulk of it. So if statements, I think, is really nice. There's a lot of topics in AP CSA that end up being really abstract or really kind of like, what's going on? If statements, we'll go through it. There are a lot of variations to if statements, but the kind of basic pattern is fairly simple to get your head around. So so now we get into the variations. There are, how many slides? There are 11 slides here, and basically each one is talking about a different variation of if statements. So there are if-else statements. So if-else statements means we're going to, in the example that we have in the code editor here, we're either doing a thing or doing nothing. An if-else statement means that we're going to do either one thing or another thing. So, the slide here has kind of got the definition, but we don't have an if-else example, so I'll make one for you. We don't have one in the slides. So we'll put the else here, and then we'll say system.out.println, you can't print a car. Okay. So press play here, and I forgot my semicolon like a genius. And you can't rent a car, right? And then we change it to 27. You can legally rent a car, okay? So not crazy, right? So you're either doing one thing or another thing. And, the syntax is a little bit weird. There's a lot of braces. So, if you forget one of these braces, good luck. The error message out of Java is going to be like wild. But remember your curly braces, type it all out nice, and you will be all set. Okay. And so that's good. So there's our if-else statement example. So nested ifs means that one if statement is inside of the other. So we've got one condition on the kind of outer if statement, and then we have one condition on the inner if statement. And so everything inside of the outside if statement, what we call it, this top one, will happen. And then you can still inside, you can include as many if statements as you want. So you can do this nesting like as many levels as you'd like, but the most common example is that you're going to have like one level of nesting. And so you can combine these in a million different ways. I'm going to do it like this, and I'm going to get my indenting right, and I'm going to do this. And here's where you actually start like indenting things a lot in Java. And it's like very, useful as you're coding to get all the indents lined up so you can really see what's going on. So I'll do int person's money equals 90. Okay. So before we run the code, let's predict what's going to happen. So the person's age is 27. So 27 is greater than 24, which means that they can legally rent a car. And then we're going to do this as a part of evaluating the code inside of the outer if statement, because this condition evaluated it true. To run that code inside of here, we're going to then check if the person's money is less than 100. And if it's less than 100, we say you can't afford to. So I predict that it's going to print both statements. But if we have 110, then it should just say you can legally rent a car. And then you can go crazy. And you can say, in here, you can do nested, every basic, you can do infinite combinations. You can do infinite combinations of if statements, and I will remember my semicolon. And you can do that. And then as I had in my slides, we can also say an else statement on the outside. Right? So it can get as complicated as you'd like. Okay, so this code should do the same thing with the values that we have, but if we make the person 12, you legally cannot rent a car, and it's not going to do anything about this code. So that's a very important thing here, right? Is like, think about how the code is executing and kind of like, you can imagine it in your head. Java is going to initialize these two variables. It's going to say if person's age greater than 24, it's going to make that comparison. And if this value is to false, then it's going to skip all of this stuff and go right down to what's in the else statement. So very important. It's not going to do this if statement just because the if statement's there, right? It's going to skip it because all of this stuff in here is inside the curly braces for the top if statement. Okay, cool. So else if statements are another way to do things. So you can make one comparison and then you can make a second comparison in kind of like this like long chain of things here. So let's do this. We'll take this code. We'll nuke everything here. And we'll get our indents right. Okay. So let's see. I'll make this a little wider. Okay. So the person's age is 27. So we can predict that this top if statement will evaluate to true. Okay. So you can legally rent a car. Cool. Now let's make the person 18. Okay. The person should be able to get a learner's permit. They can't rent a car. Now let's make the person 12. And nothing gets printed out. Okay. So that's else if. But now we can also do an else at the end. So I'm going to copy this in. want to get my indents right. And now it should print, don't even go near a car. So again, this is all pretty logical. What's going to be a challenge is as you're doing coding assignments with all of the else and the else ifs, there's just so many braces and you're going to like forget, for example, right? If you forget this else here, the error message out of Java is going to be wild. Okay. So, you really have to kind of like understand the patterns of what's going on, and get that figured out. So like, why was this an error? See what it says here. It says if, and then it says else, and then it says else. Doesn't make any sense, right? Because you can't have two else things going on. And there's a comparison that goes on here. So every time there's a comparison in a parentheses, you need an if associated with it. So you can do it this way. And one thing that's kind of interesting is you can change this spacing up as much as you want. And you can kind of see what's going on. So if this, else, we're going to do a whole other if statement. And then we're going to have an else here. So you can change the spacing up and this should still work. But most people type it all out in the pattern that I'm doing it. Okay, so that's actually it. That's my final example, but use your imagination. This can get as complicated as you'd like. You can have else if, else if, else if, else if, else. You can have else if, else if, else if, no else. You can have an if statement and then an else if, and then you can have in your else if, you can have an if here, or you can have an if down here in your else. Like you can do as many combinations as you'd like. So that's where it gets confusing, and that's where you're going to get test questions and all sorts of stuff like that. So I wish you the best of luck as you're working on your if statement stuff, and thanks for watching.